We spent a ton of money, billions really, on job training. But what if we're starting in the completely wrong place? Today, we're going to dig into a pretty radical idea that true competence, the kind that actually matters, isn't built in a classroom. Nope, it's built on the factory floor, in the office, right at the actual work site. Okay, so let's get into it. The good news is governments are finally starting to modernize technical and vocational training. You might know it as TVET. They're trying to make skills training way more flexible and, actually relevant to the jobs that exist today. And that's a huge step in the right direction. But here's the thing. When a team isn't hitting its targets or you need to introduce a new skill, is the automatic fix just more training? Is that always the right move? And that brings us to what you could call the training paradox. We pour all this time and money into skills development, but then there's this frustrating gap, right? A gap between what somebody learns in a course and what they actually need to do on the job. So what's going on here? Where's the disconnect? Well, this really gets to the heart of the problem. Think about it. A training center has to create these general, one-size-fits-all programs for a huge market. But a real business, especially a smaller one, has its own unique way of doing things, its own specific equipment, its own culture. A generic course just can't possibly account for all those specifics. So, what happens when performance drops? The go-to reaction is almost always the same. Sign people up for more courses, rack up more training hours, and collect more certificates to hang on the wall. We're treating all this activity like it's the solution, but a lot of the time it's just a band-aid. It doesn't fix what's actually broken. So if just piling on more training hours doesn't guarantee better performance, then what does? How do we finally close that gap between the classroom and the actual workplace? The real solution, well, it requires a complete shift in how we think about this. We have to stop making training the starting point. Instead, we need to start with the work itself. We have to anchor competence to the actual job. And this single idea right here is everything. It's the foundation for a way more effective approach. It's not about getting rid of training, not at all. It's about building that training on the right foundation. The reality of what the job is, day in and day out. So what does anchoring to work even mean in practice? It means that before you even think about a training course, you have to get crystal clear on what the job is. Not the version in the textbook, but how it is actually performed in your workplace. What does a great job in that specific role really truly look like? Now, this way of thinking, it builds out into a whole new system for skills. And we're not talking about just a few small tweaks here and there. We're talking about creating a totally new framework, a real competence system that makes every bit of skills development count. And this system rests on 4 pillars. First, you define exactly what good performance looks like in terms you can actually see and measure. Second, you assess people while they're doing the real job, under real pressure. Third, you verify that assessment to make sure it's fair and totally reliable. And only then, as the very last step, do you train to fill the specific gaps you now know for a fact exist. And let's be absolutely clear about this. This is not an anti-training system. It's the total opposite. It makes training incredibly powerful because you're not just training for the sake of training anymore. You're surgically targeting a problem you've already diagnosed and verified. Just think about the old way for a second. We just kind of assume training works. We count how many hours someone sat in a classroom as proof that they learned something. And then we just cross our fingers and hope for the best. It's a system built on hope, not evidence. Now compare that to this new way. Here, we define what competence is from the very beginning. The proof isn't a piece of paper, it's actual evidence of performance on the job. We don't hope for competence, we verify it. See the difference? It's a system built entirely on proof. So, this is the real competence shift. It's about moving away from just assuming that training will magically lead to competence and moving toward a disciplined system where you define it, you measure it, and you verify it. And what this really does is it puts the responsibility right where it should have been all along, with the organization itself. It's up to every company to own this, to define the skills it needs, to create the standards, and to make sure its people are actually meeting them. This becomes the new mantra, right? The guiding principle for how we develop people. Competence cannot be assumed but must be verified. You can't just hope your team is great, you have to prove it. And that leaves us with one last question for you to really think about. Take a good, hard look at your own organization. Are you focused on building and proving real on-the-job competence, or are you still just collecting certificates? The answer to that question, well, it could change everything. Because in the end, it's not about what you've learned, it's about what you can do.